You walk through the front door, same hallway, same smell of wood and faint dust you've known for years. But something is different, something you can't name, can't point to, can't fix, because nothing is actually broken. You stand there in a place that belongs to you on paper, surrounded by your things, your furniture, your walls. And yet there is this quiet, unsettling feeling that you are somewhere you do not belong. You are a stranger in your own home, and the worst part, you don't know when it started. This isn't about a messy apartment. It isn't about needing to redecorate. What you're feeling is a neurological event, a silent reclassification happening deep inside your brain. And once you understand what's actually triggering it, you will never look at a room the same way again. Let's go back, way back. For most of human history, your ancestors didn't have addresses. They had territories. They had shelters that were only as safe as the group inside them. A cave, a clearing, a cluster of trees near water. Home wasn't a concept. It was a survival signal. Your nervous system learned, over hundreds of thousands of years, to read an environment the way a smoke detector reads air. Always scanning, always asking one question. Is this place safe for me? Not safe in the sense of locked doors and alarm systems. Safe in a much older sense, emotionally safe. Predictable. Filled with signals that your identity is recognized, that you belong, that the space reflects back something true about who you are. Your ancestors who failed to read those signals correctly didn't survive long enough to pass the lesson on. The ones who did, who felt that deep exhale when the shelter was right, when the fire was warm, when the people around them were known, those were your ancestors. You inherited their nervous system. You inherited their need, and you carry it into every apartment, every house, every room you've ever tried to call home. That's what home actually is. Not a building. A feeling your nervous system is allowed to have inside a building. And that distinction changes everything. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Mark Freed was studying communities in Boston's West End, working-class neighborhoods that were being demolished for urban renewal. He expected people to feel inconvenienced, maybe sad. What he found instead shook him. Residents weren't just unhappy about moving. They were grieving. Genuinely, clinically grieving. The same way people grieve a person they have lost. Depression, anxiety, a persistent sense of meaninglessness. Freud called it grieving for a lost home. His conclusion was radical for the time. Place is not a backdrop to human life. It is woven into identity. When you lose a place that held you, you lose part of yourself with it. But here's the thing, Freud's work implies that nobody talks about you don't have to move to lose a home. You can lose it while staying perfectly still. Think about the last time a space felt completely right for you. Not just comfortable, right. Where every corner made sense. Where you exhaled the moment you walked in. Now ask yourself, what was actually happening in your life during that time? Because your brain was not measuring the walls, it was measuring you. The neuroscience of place attachment shows that a space feels like home when three things align. First, emotional safety. You associate that place with being understood, not judged, not threatened. Second, predictability. The space behaves the way you expect, which signals to your ancient nervous system that this territory is under control. And third, identity reflection. The space mirrors back something true about who you currently are. Who you actually are. Not who you used to be. Not who others expect you to be. Who you are right now. When all three are present, your brain registers the space as home. When even one of them breaks, when the emotional safety disappears, when the predictability collapses, when the space reflects back someone you no longer recognize, your nervous system quietly pulls the file and reclassifies the place. Not as dangerous, just as neutral, just as somewhere you happen to be. That reclassification is the moment the house stops feeling like home. John Bowlby, one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century, spent his career studying attachment, the deep biological need humans have to bond with people and places that make them feel safe. His theory was about children and caregivers, but its implications reach into every room you've ever lived in. Bowlby found that when an attachment is broken, when a safe source is suddenly absent, changed, or unrecognizable, the body responds with protest, despair, and eventually detachment. You fight for it, then you mourn it, then you go quiet. Most people who have lost the feeling of home go through that exact sequence without ever realizing what they're grieving, and the triggers are almost invisible. A relationship ends, but you keep living in the apartment you shared. The walls remember things your nervous system is no longer safe inside. You get a promotion, or a loss, or a diagnosis, and suddenly, the person who comes home every evening is different from the person who decorated this space, who chose these colors, who hung that photograph. The space hasn't changed. The match has broken. Sometimes it's not even that dramatic. Sometimes it's just slow drift. You grow. Your life changes in small, invisible ways over months and years. And one day, you look around at a space that perfectly expressed who you were 3 years ago, and it fits like a shirt 2 sizes too small. It's yours. You chose it. But it doesn't say anything true about you anymore. That's not decoration. That's identity displacement. And it can feel profoundly disorienting without any obvious cause. Researchers at the University of Surrey studied what they called place of identity, the way physical environments become part of how people define themselves. What they found was that when your environment stops reflecting your current identity, something specific happens in the brain. The same regions that process social rejection become active. Your brain interprets a mismatched space the way it interprets being misunderstood by someone you love. With a low persistent discomfort, you can't quite locate. You feel it, but you can't name it. So you paint the walls. You buy new furniture. You rearrange things at midnight without knowing why. You're trying to fix an emotional signal with a physical solution, and it almost never works. Because the problem was never the room. Think about what happens in the body when you walk into a space that does feel like home. Your shoulders drop. Your jaw unclenches. Your breathing slows down without you deciding to slow it down. These aren't poetic metaphors. These are measurable physiological responses. Your cortisol levels drop. Your parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for rest and safety, comes online. Your body stops bracing. It stops scanning for threats. It lets go. Now think about what happens when that same response stops coming. When you cross that threshold and your body stays tense. When the exhale never arrives. Day after day, you enter a space that should signal safety, and instead your nervous system just stays on alert. Low grade, constant, exhausting in a way that's hard to explain to anyone who hasn't felt it. That chronic low-level vigilance has real consequences. Disrupted sleep, difficulty relaxing, a persistent feeling of being slightly off, slightly out of place, slightly not quite yourself. Not because something terrible is happening, just because the place that was supposed to turn the alarm off never does. Now here is the part that nobody tells you, because it requires you to sit with something uncomfortable. There are people living right now in homes that look perfect. Beautiful kitchens, warm lighting, everything organized and tasteful, and exactly the way it should be. And they feel nothing. Not unhappy exactly, just empty inside those walls. A kind of quiet loneliness that doesn't make sense on paper. Because on paper, everything is fine. What their nervous system is telling them, quietly, persistently, in the language of vague unease, is that the space no longer knows them. Not because the space has failed, because they have changed, and the space was never updated to match who they became. A house can become a museum to a version of yourself you no longer inhabit. And walking through a museum every day is its own kind of grief. So, what do you do with this? The first thing, and this is harder than it sounds, is to stop treating it as a practical problem. Stop adding throw pillows. Stop blaming the square footage. Sit with the question underneath the feeling. What has changed in me that this space no longer reflects? What do I need from a home right now that I'm not getting? Not what did I used to need? What do I need now? The second thing is to pay attention to where in the space your body does relax, even slightly. A corner, a chair by the window, a room that still holds something true about who you are. Those pockets of ease are not accidents. They are clues. Your nervous system is telling you what still fits, and from that small foothold, you can begin to rebuild the match, not by decorating, but by being honest about who you are now and letting the space start to reflect that. Because home, in its deepest sense, is where you are allowed to be your current self, not your past self, not your idealized self, the actual, present, evolving self you are today. When a space allows that, when it says yes to who you are right now, your nervous system exhales. That is the signal. That is what you're looking for. And it can happen in a new place or an old one, in a rebuilt room or a changed relationship with the same room. What matters is the alignment, the match between who you are and what the space reflects back. Mark Freed watched people grieve a neighborhood. John Bowlby mapped the biology of losing what feels safe. And the researchers at Surrey showed us that the brain doesn't separate self from space the way we think it does. They all reached the same conclusion from different directions. Home is not a location. It is a relationship between a nervous system and an environment. And like any relationship, it requires attention, honesty, and sometimes the courage to change. You walked through that door. At the beginning of this, you felt like a stranger. Maybe now you understand what actually happened, not to the house, but to you. And maybe that's not a loss. Maybe that's information, an invitation to find your way back or forward to a place where you can finally exhale again. Home was never the address. It was always the feeling your body finally knew it was safe to have. If this made you see something differently today, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. It helps us keep going deeper into the things that quietly shape how you live, feel, and think. New videos every week. See you in the next one.